We're still really at the early days of AI, if you think about kind of how long the world's existed in comparison to how long AI has existed. It's a microscopic kind of moment in time.
Agents are more productive. They're less mental strain. They're going to be more happy. We're going to have less attrition. The customers are going to be happier on the other side because they're able to get a response faster.
It's almost like these tools are just this little extension of our brain that we're sort of dipping into from time to time, rather than reimagining what we're doing.
You augment, everybody are 15% more productive. Your attrition go down because the agents are having a better work experience. The customer satisfactions get higher up, so you get less penalties, more bonuses with your clients. So it's a win-win for everybody.
This episode of VUX World is brought to you by NLX. NLX is the enterprise conversational AI platform that enables some of the world's most admired brands to build and manage chat, voice, and multimodal applications at scale. So if you are looking for a platform to power all of your conversational automation initiatives, you're looking for something that's enterprise grade, something that gives you the flexibility and control to create the kind of experiences that you know your customers need, then check out NLX. You can find out more at nlx.ai. That's nlx.ai. Thank you, NLX, for sponsoring VUX World. The following is a conversation with Guillaume Laporte, who is the Chief AI Officer at Foundever. Now, Foundever is a huge company, 150,000 employees, $4 billion of revenue. It's absolutely massive. It's a BPO, probably one of the biggest BPOs out there. And this conversation is such an interesting conversation because AI and generative AI are either the biggest threat that the BPO space has ever come across in its life, or the biggest opportunity. And this conversation is about that. But more importantly, arguably, for those of you that are not in the BPO space, it's a very deep conversation about how to go about deciding whether to buy or build or partner when it comes to developing your AI solutions. Guillaume is a legend in the AI space. He's the founder of Mindset. We've had him on the podcast way back in 2019, a conversational AI platform, chatbot platform, exited that in 2022 and now runs AI at Foundever. And so if there's anyone who can put together a technology strategy around how to do this stuff at scale, it's Guillaume. And this conversation is a really great one because at Foundever, they've got a whole bunch of AI solutions in play, from agent assist tooling to their own internal version of ChatGPT, which they built because of the actual price of licensing it from OpenAI was going to be to the tune of $45 million to provide it to all of their staff. And so this is a really, really great conversation about the specific considerations, 3 in particular, that you need to take on board if you're going to decide whether to buy, build, or partner when it comes to your AI solutions. We get into how to identify opportunities, the complexities of building solutions like this in an environment like Foundever has, which has got multiple clients speaking multiple languages with multiple systems that agents have to use. And so it's a really, really high complex environment. And so if you are interested in whether to buy or build, how to go about formulating teams to deliver value using generative AI, and also if you're interested in the transformative potential of generative AI for a company or an industry like the BPO industry, then this is a conversation that you do not want to miss out on. Without further ado, this is Guillaume Laporte of Foundever on VUX World. Guillaume, welcome back to the podcast. Guillaume Laporte, it's your second time. Welcome back.
Thank you, Kane. Happy to be here.
Thank you, and happy to have you back. Welcome as always. How have you been?
Been good. Busy as always, right? I guess AI era has been keeping me really busy for sure.
I'm just going to have a quick go. I should have done this beforehand. I should have really prepared this. But when were you on VUX World? Because I think it was quite a while ago now, wasn't it?
2018, I believe, or 19. 2019, I think.
Yeah, it was 2019, September. Yeah.
So it's been 6 years almost.
6 years. What's really interesting is the last few episodes, or at least not the last few, but some of the episodes this year so far have been with people who have been on in the past. And it's generally speaking probably about that long ago. 2018, 2019, 2020. And what's really interesting is that, over the years, over the last few years, you've had kind of like, large language models and generative AI have got exploded. And what's been really good about that is it's brought a whole new kind of like plethora of people into this space who can now build interesting things and do interesting things with it. But it's really interesting to sort of see amongst that community who was kind of there kind of like
Before,
back then. Yeah, who was there back then and what are they
who are the
doing?
OGs?
Yeah, yeah. Who's the OGs in this space and what are they doing now? And so it's great to have you back and yeah, looking forward to hearing a bit more about what you're up to.
With pleasure.
So tell us then, tell us about, the last 6 years, I suppose. Not that we're gonna have enough time to go deep into the entirety of the 6 years, but you've been on a journey, you're still involved deeply in AI, doing some really interesting stuff. So yeah, what's been the situation?
All right, I'll try to make it short. So back then, when we talked, I was the co-founder and CEO of Manse, a conversational AI company that we kept growing until 2022, when we exited the company to a Chinese RPA company called Laie. After that, I worked for a while with Laie. It was very interesting to help Laie become an international sort of scale up. And in 2023, late 2023, I joined a really large enterprise called Foundever. It's one of the leading BPO company in the world. So we do business process outsourcing. Basically, companies outsource their customer service operations to us. And I've joined Foundever as Chief AI Officer for now about a year and a half. So yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Nice. And so you sold Mindset or exited Mindset right around the time of the launch of ChatGPT when the world
Yes.
changed.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, we sold the company about 6 months before generative AI arrived, and so it was very interesting to well, first transition and integrate our small startup into a very large scale up, and a European company into a Chinese international company. So that was from a cultural standpoint and from an integration standpoint, it was very challenging and very interesting. And yeah, well, sometimes after we started pivoting to generative AI, so changing the approach of natural language processing, natural language understanding with traditional intent detection approach and flow builder approach to generative AI and RAG and detecting intent using LLMs, etc. I left about a year and a half after joining, and I went on a completely different challenge, basically how to transform a very, very large enterprise, 150,000 employees worldwide, right? So it's a very, very large company in 49 countries, and how to implement AI into this industry. And back then, we were all convinced that call centers were going to disappear right away after the arrival of ChatGPT. I guess now we know, right, almost 3 years later, that it's not really as simple as this. It's a bit more complicated, but it is at the same time a very big threat and a very big opportunity to have generative AI for a company like Foundever. And so, that's what I've been doing.
Very interesting. And I think that there is probably, those two last kind of words you ended on, threat and opportunity. It's probably, things happen a lot slower than you might think. So as you were saying there, like, maybe we thought it was the end of the contact center. That hasn't transpired yet to be the case. However, we're still really at the early days of AI generally. If you think about kind of like how long the world's existed for in comparison to how long AI has existed, it's like it's a little microscopic kind of like moment in time. But for BPOs particularly, there's from the way I've kind of been thinking about this, and it'd be interesting to get your thoughts because Foundever seems to be out at the forefront of this kind of stuff, which I think is really crucial because the risk is quite severe that businesses start to just automate their own stuff, doing it themselves, cutting out the BPO. And so there's a potential risk there. However, the opportunity is such that you've got clients that you're currently doing this stuff for. And so if you can diversify in terms of, not just having agents answering calls and doing those things, but also having AI do the same thing, then potentially, not just is it an opportunity and a threat, it could be, depending on the lens you look at it from, the biggest threat that BPOs have ever faced, arguably, and also potentially the biggest opportunity that BPOs have ever come across. Would you kind of
It's a
concur with that?
that's one way to sure look at it. I tend to agree with that point of view. I think it's all about efficiency and costs at the end of the day. Whether you use humans or AI or a mix of humans and AI, or if you use augmented humans, or if you use just AI agents, agentic agents. What really matters is about customer experience. So what is the end experience for the end customer, so the caller? Or the caller or the person through the chat? How is the experience for them? And the other criteria is, of course, the efficiency, right? So how expensive it is, how fast it is to service customers. That's what it all matters at the end of the day. And so if you ignore generative AI, and generative AI is going to create massive amounts of efficiencies and savings, and so you're going to endure this unfair competition against you, right? Because like AI agentic agents are going to be, probably cheaper in the future. They're going to be very, very fast, very easy to integrate, etc. Or agents that are using generative AI, so humans that are using generative AI are going to be faster at responding to you. The queues are going to be lower, etc. So basically, it's creating. Think of it as a new competition. Like everyone becomes much, much more productive, humans and AI together. So the question is, how do you make sure that you become part of that new efficiency? How do you become part of that new beneficial trend, right? So for the humans and for the companies and for the callers. So it's a right balance, right? How do you make the cost cheaper for the company to service? How do you make a good experience for the caller? And how do you still provide efficient quality service with a human or with an agent, with an AI agent?
Mm. And I think maybe the unique space that BPOs have and that Foundever has is that if you look at other companies that you kind of you partner with, but then also for your clients, if they decided to just kind of do it themselves rather than use Foundever, then they would also have to partner with these companies, which is the CCaaS companies.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting is that, there's definitely a movement towards CCaaS providers becoming a lot more AI enabled. Although I would argue that it's in kind of like fits and starts. It's not necessarily like the whole industry has all gone all in on AI and now they're all AI companies with CCaaS plumbing. It's that a lot of them are still perceiving themselves as CCaaS, and the AI is like the add-on. So it's almost as if like I've always thought that on the CCaaS side, those vendors, AI is a completely different kettle of fish, and although it's in a related space because it's kind of like doing similar stuff in terms of handling calls or interactions or whatever, the discipline and skills and understanding that you need to build AI products, I don't think are the same necessarily as building a CCaaS solution. So I always feel a little bit as though the CCaaS providers are at a little bit of a disadvantage. But what the interesting part about the BPO space is and Foundever is that you've got agents handling calls day in, day out for companies across the globe, which means that you've got expertise in customer success and customer service. You've got data, whether you can use that data or not, I don't know, but you've got vast amounts of data essentially that you can potentially leverage to develop models and understanding and capabilities that you can then leverage. And you've got nothing really that I don't think, unless you can tell me otherwise, nothing really that is a reason. There's no limiting factor for a BPO to develop the expertise to design and build and deploy AI solutions like there is perhaps in the CCaaS space. Would you agree with that or not?
Yeah, this for sure the first part, right? Whether you are a CCaaS or a knowledge-based solution or a conversational AI platform, you only see a part of the equation, right? When you're the telephony system, you only listen to the calls, but you don't necessarily have access to the CRMs and the backend tools. When you're a conversational AI platform, you certainly don't have access to the training materials and the past conversations, etc. Right? I remember when we were building bots, we always wanted to have access to the human transcripts so we can train the bots with the data from the humans. You don't necessarily have that access. When you're the knowledge base, you don't necessarily have all the transactions, so the calls and the emails and the chats. we as BPO tend to have access to everything, right? So we work on the training, we work on the onboarding, we have processes, the SOP, the standard operating procedures. We also have the transcripts and the calls. Whether we can use those or not is obviously very dependent on the relationship with the clients. And so we are indeed uniquely positioned to leverage AI to provide this gain of efficiency, either by building AI agents or by augmenting humans to the point where they remain relevant against AI agents. The last part of your statement, I think, is incorrect. Is the challenge when you're BPO is the scale of transformation that you have to do, because you're talking about, as I said, 150,000 people. So that's a very, very large company. How do you transform how all these people work? How do you roll out all these tools? And you have to understand that every client that we work for has a different setup. So it's different laptops, it's different headsets, it's different CRMs, CCAS, knowledge base, et cetera, et cetera. And so the complexity is like, I think our CTO gave a good analogy. It's like a room with 1,000 walls in it, right? So it's a maze technically, right? And it's very hard to navigate that maze to get to where you want to be, because you have all these complexities and restrictions. But you're right that we at least have all the tools to navigate that maze, right? Which is great, right? So that would be the analogy that I use. So we have all the tools to be able to know what is needed to be done, but it's just very, very complex to do it at scale, just because of the sheer size of how big we are.
That's a very good point, actually. Yeah, different clients with different systems and different processes and different CCAS and different CRMs and all that kind of stuff. I can imagine. Obviously, that adds tremendous complexity, doesn't it? Then you've got all that amount of agents who, and you don't.
I think the average number of tools that any of our agents use is like 17.
Wow.
And that's the average, right?
Mm.
So for some more modern companies, maybe they only use 5 or 6. But for some older companies that have different lines of businesses and different tools for different countries and different tools for different sub brands, right? Because you have these big, massive companies that have multiple sub brands. You end up with like 34, 35 different tools.
Wow.
And some of them are legacy systems, right? Like think of cryptic insurance software to retrieve the profile of the customer, very old school databases where you have to do almost SQL queries to retrieve documents. So sometimes very, very, very old systems that are still necessary, still in place in many cases.
So arguably then, to be honest, yeah, I'll go back on my original statement there then. So arguably speaking, you have probably the most complex tasks to sort out than arguably anybody, because a business that has a very large contact center still only has whatever limited tools they have. Maybe there's 35 of them, but that's still limited in comparison to the number of different businesses that you work with and the number of different solutions that they're going to have and all that kind of stuff. So where then do you start? As chief AI officer, presumably your role is to leverage AI in a way that's going to be beneficial for the company and to do it in the right kind of way. And I would say that one of the most important parts of doing anything with any technology, whether it's AI or otherwise, is finding the right thing to do firI
Yes.
So where do you start?
That was my first 4 months in the company. Is okay, what do we do, right? I guess what was really helpful was to spend time on the floors, right? So like shadowing agents across dozens of customers in many, many different countries. And then you start to see recurring things, right? And recurring themes. So the way I approach it is, okay, so we have the strategy at first. So the strategy is in threefold. Is first, augmented agents. So how do we make our humans much, much more productive so that they remain relevant in the AI world that we are entering? So that's the first part of the strategy. Second part of the strategy is AI agents, automated agents. How do we roll out agents that are automated and that are going to be alleviating a lot of unuseful interactions, right? So there's always going to be calls that are very simple. Those don't need to be handled by an agent. And we'd like to build that as well ourselves, like not just let the companies automate that, right? And the third part of that strategy was just as an enterprise, how do we become very efficient? So how do we have less SG&A costs, basically. How do we become more lean as a company? And once you've articulated that tripod of efforts, so we augment our agents, we automate some of the interactions, and we become a very agile and lean company. Then what are the solutions that you need in each of those pillars? And so for the approach that I took is we're going to build some stuff ourselves, either because it's easy to build it ourselves or because it's super strategic that we have a stake in this technology. And the parts that are too complex or too hard to build in-house, then we partner with startups and vendors from the market. And so I tried to do a good mix of, okay, certain things are super critical and we can make those happen within a year or two. So we built them ourselves. And some stuff we say, okay, there are good vendors out there. There are good companies. We can make the business model work because of our scale. That's also the interesting part is when we buy seats or minutes or tokens, we buy in millions, right? And that usually generate economies of scale that allow us to resell that solution cheaper than anybody else, but still with a profit, right? So that's also the interesting way of our massive scale. And we tried to then do the mix, right? Okay, so like an agent copilot, we're going to build it ourselves because that's super critical. We want to have an agent assist kind of tool because that's how we augment our own resources. How do we do our work? We do humans and we allow them to be very efficient. But then for chatbots, right? Chatbots are very mainstream, but they're hard to build. I know that because I've tried to build many of them for many years. So then for that, it's probably better to do a partnership and have a price per conversation that is interesting so that we can resell these chatbots and we create expertise, we create knowledge, we create processes, we create capacity. And again, because we have access to all the tools, we can make chatbots they're going to do the right thing. They're going to say the right thing. They're going to be connected to the right tools. And we can do that on behalf of our customers easier, right? Because you have to think of this as well. Our customers, customer service is a small part of what they do, right? Like, if you're a bank, doing customer service is a small part of your business. If you're a fintech, it's a small part of your business. The rest is servicing your customers and, doing financial services. So for us, it's everything that we do. So that's the only thing that we have expertise on, right? So we can leverage that expertise and that scale to deploy these technologies for our customers. So that's how I approached it.
So interesting. You alluded to some of the sort of decision-making processes in terms of why you would decide to do something, build it yourself versus partner. Complexity was part of it. Strategic imperative was another. Are there any other kind of elements that you consider when it comes to building this kind of stuff yourself versus partnering or versus buying something off the shelf that's already done?
Business model, right, is the financial feasibility as well, right? So, I give you a simple example, right? Like, we wanted a generic ChatGPT for every employee to use. So what do? You buy a ChatGPT license, like a ChatGPT Enterprise or ChatGPT Plus, ChatGPT Team, which is $30 or up to $60 per seat. Even if you negotiate prices, etc., you're still at a significant price. So you make the math, right? 150,000 people multiply by $25 a month times 12. That's $45 million. It probably makes more sense to build your own ChatGPT with OpenAI models and other models that are open source and etc. on top of AWS and on top of Azure. And maybe it's not going to have all the features of ChatGPT that people like to use. Maybe it's not going to have all the latest models, but you're going to have 80% of the value for 1% of the costs, right? So that's basically that's a decent math, right? It's like, okay, it is hard to build a good app like ChatGPT, but it's not that hard to the point where you're going to spend $45 million per year. That's a bit how you approach, right? I guess the number, the complexity, and the strategic imperative are the three criteria that you look at.
Interesting. Yeah, 40 odd million pound. I mean, dollars. I wonder how OpenAI are even going to scale that then, because already they've hit a massive limit on the kind of companies that are going to take on this at full scale. You know.
I guess they're probably not. There's not a lot of companies that are 150,000 employees, right? Like, even if you look at BCG and these types of companies, they don't have that much employee, right? So I guess they're probably targeting companies that are in the thousands of employees and not in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees with these kind of pricing model. They probably also do massive discounts, and then they also probably need it for they're probably doing deals for, I would do focus on pure office workers, right? Whereas we are not office workers. Like we do a service to humans, right? So you don't need ChatGPT all day unless you work in an office role, right? So our corporate employees are about 8,000 people, right? And the rest is operations. So the people that service customers. So you don't need probably ChatGPT Enterprise for all the operations. You need it for only a subset of it, etc. So you have to do the math, right? But the math still adds up to build it yourself.
That's crazy. That's so. In doing that, you've alluded to two use cases there. Then you've alluded to, well, three actually. One is the sort of like internal employee facing ChatGPT style solution. The other is the kind of like chatbots that you're partnering. You mentioned partnering on, and the other was the kind of like agent assist type of capabilities. Are those the three sort of like major kind of like endeavors that you're working on, like, or speak to us about kind of like, yeah, what does the landscape look like for you at the moment in terms of the solutions you're working on?
So the solutions that we are building in-house. So yeah, EverAssist, it's our agent assist tool that we're building in-house. But I guess the thing is, like, between in-house and partnership is like the line is becoming blurry now, right? Because even for the tools that you built in-house, you're not going to build necessarily all the models that are behind it, right? So you'll likely use the speech to text or the text to speech or the LLMs, or maybe even sometimes the login system, etc. So you either use commercial through commercial partnerships or open source technology. So there's very few that you end up building entirely yourself. But I guess when you say build it yourself, is you own the expertise, you own the ability to scale it, and you own the knowledge of how this tool is developed so that other companies cannot build it as easily, right? So it's the problem statement, the features, and the technology behind it.
Presumably, the orchestration piece presumably is the stuff that you build yourself.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So our agent assist, we're called EverAssist. We're really excited about it. We're starting to roll it out at scale. We already have about 8,000 users using it at the moment. We're going to get to 30,000 by the end of the year. And so there's still a long road to get through, but it's catching a lot of traction for sure. And it's making just everything makes more sense, right? Agents are more productive. They're less mental strain. They're going to be more happy. We're going to have less attrition. The customers are going to be happier on the other side because they're able to get a response faster. They're going to get a better accuracy. And basically, we wanted to work on features that are really useful across the board. So it doesn't matter if you do chat or email or back office services or credit collection. It doesn't really matter what activity you're doing as a customer service representative. We wanted to create features that are going to be useful across the board. So those are, like, for example, a wrap-up functionality. So at the end of every call, at the end of every email, at the end of every chat, you have a little nice summary that is available, and you can drag and drop into the CRM that you're using at the moment. A dictation functionality, because we speak faster than we type. So we want, whether they're using chat, email, or they're writing something in the CRM or in their emails, they can use dictation through their headset, and it writes it down super, super fast. And now you have great ways to do that, right? So I don't know if you follow a little bit, like, the latest text to speech, speech to text are getting really, really accurate and really fast,
Mm.
processing sub 200 milliseconds. And you can use LLM to rewrite the texts as it's printed out, etc. So there's some really elegant agent assist use cases that can be shared across the board and can be useful for everybody. And then you augment everybody are 15% more productive. Your attrition go down because the agents are having a better work experience. The customer satisfactions get higher up. So you get less penalties, more bonuses with your clients. So it's a win-win for everybody, this tool. I'm really excited about. We
And
also
are those sorry,
Yes.
before we move on to the other any other solution, those kind of like outcomes that you alluded to there, are they, because it's clear that there is highly likely to be a trend based on that type of solution. It's logical to think that, well, if I make someone's life easier, they're going to be enjoying their job more, therefore they're not going to leave. And then if they're happier at work, that's going to spill over into the customer interaction, therefore CSAT's going to be higher. So like it's definitely logical to have that as a logical kind of outcome. But is that a theoretical logical outcome, or have you actually seen that in the data somewhere, that from these 30,000 users that are using it, or 8,000 that are using it so far, have you noticed this kind of stuff? I don't know whether you can share that or not, but like, is that theoretical, or is there actual numbers kind of behind that?
I can share a couple of numbers. We're going to do some more marketing at Foundever in the next few months. So I encourage people to check it out on our website or on LinkedIn. But yeah, we almost like 15% improvement in AHT, average handling time, is across the board. So whether you're doing chat, email, or call, you have 15% more productivity thanks to an agent assist kind of approach. And you are right in the sense that everybody is doing it, right? So the CCaaS has their own agent assists. The CRM have their own agent assists, right? So Salesforce, Agentforce, Genesys have their own. Zendesk is launching a lot of plugins, a lot of native Gen AI capabilities as well. And so I think at the end of the day, like what makes sense is that we all do what we can to make the work better and the service better for the end customer, right? So, you're going to have some features that Salesforce do really well, and there's no need to use EverAssist upon Ever Agent Assist, but some that maybe are too expensive or too complex to roll out or not specific to enough, right? So we want to make sure that it's kind of it's not a one size fits all. It's more like throw many features, and the ones that stick really end up making a difference.
Nice. That's great. That's a really good number. You were moving on to another solution, I think.
Yeah, I was talking about coaching and quality monitoring, right? So measuring absorbing the calls, analyzing them, and providing coaching guidelines and coaching programs to our people across the world in a scalable manner, so that we don't need to have as much headcounts to provide good coaching, but not just that, but also to provide consistently quality coachings and provide our people the ability to become much better, much faster. So that's another tool that we do in-house. We're also building our own AI agents, right? So agentic agents. We partner as well with third-party companies of the like of Cognigy, right? And you're very familiar with them. But we also develop our own agentic agents that are more, think of it like the first recipient of the call, right? So think of welcoming you, gathering your details, answering some very basic questions, and then depending on what you need, our AI agent will route you to either another bot or human in the right department. And I think this is how we should approach it. It's not like you need one solution. The same way we have multiple people doing multiple types of services, you're going to have multiple agents doing multiple types of things for you. And I don't find it strange that you're going to call a company, you're going to talk to a first AI agent, you're going to explain it. The bot's going to say, okay, I'm going to transfer you to a human. Then the human's going to try to help you to say, okay, I'm going to give you to a bot to finalize your payment, right? Or something like this, right? And it's going to be, what needs to happen is a seamless experience. So we're also working very hard on how do you make handoffs really easy, right? So the call is getting transferred, there's no delay, the information flows between the human and the agent, vice versa. how do you sync the CRMs together? So this is kind of the third project that we're working on very actively, and as well our own EverGPT, right, which is kind of a ChatGPT for corporate employee.
Mm.
We build it ourselves for business model reasons I explained before.
Nice. Well, it sounds like you've got a hell of a lot on your plate. It's not as
Yes.
if, yeah, I mean, doing one of those things would be a big enough effort, let alone doing all of those things. So, like, how do you mentioned earlier, it's not as if you're kind of building all of this stuff entirely yourself because you're relying on, the foundation models or open source models or what have you. And that landscape is particularly volatile because every week there's a new model that comes out and there's new benchmarks and there's all kinds of kind of like, yeah, I suppose volatility is the only kind of word I could describe there in a positive way, really, because it's not as if any of the models get worse. It's usually that
No.
there's progress and it's a lot of progress happening essentially. So maybe it's the opposite of volatility if there is such a thing. It's exponential improvements to this stuff. So how do you kind of like go about keeping on top of that kind of stuff? Is there enough stability in models at the moment that you can kind of like build something with a selection of tools and that does the job pretty well? Are you constantly having to swap out models and iterate prompts? Like, how do you keep on top of the progress that's happening in this space and decide which solutions to use for what kind of tools?
Yeah, so that's not an easy topic for sure. That's another project that we do as well in-house, right? On top of the applications. It's a layer, we call it the LLM Foundry. And so it's like, well, a foundry that basically creates or serves models to the different applications. And the team behind that LLM Foundry is here to assess the different models that are on the market, the commercial and the open source. So they try to keep up with all the latest release. They get, preview access to some models because of our relationship with some vendors. They test them out for stability, latency, costs, accuracy. So they test them out really quickly, and unless there is enough research available. And then we host it on our own GPUs, right? And we fine tune them to make sure that they are as fast as possible, as accurate as possible, and as cheap to run as possible, right? Because the cost of LLMs is very much based on tokens in, token out. So when you fine tune, you need less tokens. Um, so we try to make it cheap, accurate, and low latency on top of our own GPUs, and then we serve it to the different applications. So this gives us a sort of a competitive edge because we go one layer of the onion deeper, right? And we don't just build some applications; we also build the models behind it. Not necessarily build them from scratch, right? We fine tune them and train them and evaluate them. But this gives us a sort of a layer of control and a layer of expertise that again allow us to be relevant, right? When we build an AI agent, we're going to have the right costs, the right latency, the right accuracy, depending on what the brand needs to do. If the brand is really focused on having an amazing voice, then we're going to look for the best, text to speech that is available out there. If the latency is the main issue, then you look for the smallest model that are really, really low latency, like a GPT-4o mini, right, that reply to you really quickly. If the concern is the costs, then you try to find for open source models that you can fine tune and run on your own GPU so that you don't have to pay a commercial model to a provider out there. So we try to balance all these constraints by having a dedicated team that have their own, sort of GPU environment and expertise.
Nice. Yeah, yeah. So you're working right the way down at the infrastructure layer then with your own own GPUs, and I don't know where you're getting them from, like because they're like
Yeah,
hen's teeth at the minute. But
that's the main challenge, indeed. Yes.
yeah. So how do you make that decision then? You alluded to cost, but cost seems like a part of it. But how do you make a decision about, you know, when to fine tune a model? Because there's a big debate at the moment, and it's been going on for a while in terms of like fine tuning versus RAG versus now with some of the size of the context windows. Like, is RAG even relevant in future? Like, how do you make a decision about going about fine tuning a model?
Again, the three constraints that I said. So, latency, cost, accuracy, right? So
Right.
yes, with RAG or with the context window, you can do a lot already, and we do that as well in many cases. But basically, if the focus is costs, RAG or putting a lot of content in the context window is going to drive the cost up, right? Because to do RAG, you have to have a vectorized knowledge base, you have to do search, etc. You have to create a little bit of an infrastructure, and this will have an extra cost. Whereas when you fine tune it and then you run the model, you don't have that constraint as much. Same thing for latency, right? If the more context you give to a model, the more likely it's gonna take a while to respond to you. So if the constraint is latency, then probably fine tuning gets you better results than doing RAG or putting the context in the prompt. So it's a balance. So in our case for customer service, cost and latency are very, very often the constraints. So fine tuning is kind of a good default situation. But we use RAG as well, like for knowledge retrieval. It makes much more sense than doing fine tuning, right?
Yeah. I suppose with fine tuning, how do you go about generalizing that enough so that it's useful for all of the various clients you have and use cases that you have and stuff like that? Because presumably a RAG pipeline seems at least a little bit probably simpler because the content might change, but as long as the embedded models are consistent, you're probably going to get some success with it. Whereas fine tuning, I suppose it depends on what you're fine tuning it on, really, doesn't it? But fine tuning seems to me to be a bit more specific to a certain type of outcome. So
Yes.
is that generalizable for you in terms of like applying those fine tuned models across a horizontal group of clients, so to speak?
Yeah, so you want to find again, like a little bit like the use cases, right? You want to find benefits that are across the board that you can apply to as many companies or as many applications as possible, right? So for example, for our agent assists, EverAssist, we want a model that could do simple things but really, really fast, like rewriting a text, right? So rewriting a chat or rewriting an image to match the tone of voice of the company and to fix spelling mistakes and typos. So for this, you don't necessarily need a GPT-4o to do that, right? That's going to be much more expensive and slower than using an open source, low parameter model that is probably available out there, and you fine tune it just to do these tasks, right? To fix texts, short messages, emails, and chats, and you're going to have cheaper costs to run every time the agent need text fixing, and you're going to have a lower latency, so it feels lightning speed fast, right? So that's a good example. Like, okay, for this, it doesn't make sense to use a very expensive model or to do any sorts of RAG for sure, but it makes sense to do a little bit of fine tuning and use an open source model. Same thing but if you need to do knowledge retrieval, so like search into a knowledge base, then it makes no sense to do fine tuning and you need to use a RAG architecture. But you probably don't want to throw all of the knowledge base into the context at every query, because otherwise you pay a ton of token for no reason. So it makes more sense to do RAG.
Yeah. That fine tuning use case is a really good example, actually. And it kind of makes me think a little bit about that one in particular has a sort of like horizontal, use case because spelling is spelling type of thing. But at the same time, spelling differs depending on the language. And presumably for Foundever, I imagine language being a bit of a challenge for you, is it?
Yes, for sure. Yeah, so then as well, it makes sense to use different models for different languages. And depending on the language that the agent is working on, you use different models. You fine tune certain ones and you use maybe commercial models that are better in other languages. So it's all about, making sense of that big bag of restrictions, right? So languages, accuracy, speed, costs, and then which applications makes more sense. And is sort of working with the team to make sense of all this. And I guess this all ties with the question of talent, right? You need really good people to be able to find all of these, right? And this has been the biggest challenge: is how do you find and attract talent? And I guess what we have to offer at Foundever is that we are a little bit in the most applicable type of companies, right? Where we're going to be rolling out things right away to thousands of users that are going to be using it, right? So it's kind of a lab, but at the same time, you have your audience that is there. To a little bit like universities, they have their lab and they do a lot of experimentations with student populations, etc. So it's a little bit the same approach that we have with Foundever, and that's how I've been able to attracting talents. But you need these talents to be able to manage these model complexities.
And what does talent look like then for you? Like what does a typical team or squad look like at Foundever?
So, which I guess very similar to most tech companies out there, right? We try to have balanced and autonomous teams, right? So one tech lead, one PM, and then a few engineers, right? Probably a couple of full stack or two backends and one front end. The difference between now and before is that now we have an LLM engineer or a machine learning engineer in every squad to be constantly coordinating with the LLM foundry team, which model to use, how to use it, which prompt to use, what is the best outcome, and temperatures and all these parameters. So every squad now has this new LLM engineer, if you want, call it ML engineer. We try to keep them as small as possible so that they remain agile and nimble. So that's always that's been already something interesting. Is in the past year we've grown from basically 10 people to 60, and right now we're trying to recreate some agility into the teams by splitting them up and having squads that are smaller to have again the speed and agility that you need to build stuff and iterate stuff. And again, it's a lot of work is coordination and working all together at the same time, right? So that's been very interesting.
That sounds really interesting. I suppose that, and how do you go about finding that person? I suppose because it's fairly newish in terms of the technology, and there's probably a lot of people who've got some experience in terms of, you know, because the technology is so accessible, you can get hold of APIs and you can build some cool stuff. But because of the, I suppose, I would probably say relatively slow deployment of this stuff within the enterprise, there's probably not a great deal of people who've worked on production grade, scalable solutions. So it sounds like that, correct me if I'm wrong, but that sounds like it's going to be a particular challenge to find them people.
It is. It is. It is very challenging. I guess the advantage that we have at Foundever is we can hire in so many geographies, right? I guess now a lot of people do, especially remote companies and stuff. But we have physical offices in 49 different countries, and pretty cool, etc. So we can hire in any of those countries. So that gives us a little bit of an edge. We don't have to hire only in India because this is where we have our hub, or in US because this is where we have our biggest customers, or France because this is where a lot of AI engineers are being trained and coming out of Meta and Google's labs. We can hire from any of those geographies without any constraints. So that's kind of the advantage that we have. And again, I think the mentality of you're part of a huge boat, but you're that small squad of black ops people that are here to transform things. I think that attracts as well people. So that's been the two sort of assets that we have for ourselves to find these talents and hire them.
Nice. That sounds good. That does sound, yeah, that sounds really good. So I know we spoke very briefly before kind of kicking off this about what I was kind of alluding to a little bit at the end of that question there, which is the enterprise adoption of this stuff and the speed at which that's happening, because the models are moving fast. Enterprises perhaps are not necessarily adopting them as quickly. Why do you think that is? And is that potentially going to cause you problems? I know a lot of the stuff that you're working on is more sort of internal. I don't know whether do you need to get approval, for example, from clients to do this? Are you selling this to clients? Like, what's your perspectives on the level of willingness and all that lot to adopt this kind of stuff?
Well, that's where I think there is the biggest gap in the market, is between the amount of things that are available out there and that are being released every week. There's a cool new Gen AI startup every day that is releasing something new. and the pace at which companies and people adopt things. And the gap is just getting wider every day now. Um, yeah, there are restrictions. So there are companies that have just said, like, for, you know, security stuff, like any Gen AI things have to go to a special committee. And so whenever we want to deploy something, if it's going to touch in any sorts way or form their business, they're going to want to go through that committee. That's good. That's some customers that do that. I'd say that's not a very agile approach, right? And doesn't really get momentum. But some companies are basically saying, as long as it's on your side, so the agent side, as long as it doesn't touch our customers directly, you can do everything without even requiring approval from us. So in that case, we can be really fast and roll out these technologies ourselves and improve the way we do our job. Um, it really varies depending on companies. Of course, like financial institutions and healthcare is going to be much slower than e-commerce, travel, and fintech, right? So
Mm.
it's always the same thing. But still, even within very innovative companies, I'm not going to mention some names, but even the ones that are making a lot of fuss in the market, etc., cutting jobs and rolling out hundreds of applications, etc. When you look actually inside of it, they're just scratching the surface of what's available out there. And so the gap between what's been released on the 22nd of April and what they're doing is still very, 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 very.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting because it makes you wonder, is that a knowledge gap thing? Because there's so much going on, there's so many new tools around, there's so many new models being released. It's like it's a very complex place to get your head around. And also I think that what's often missing perhaps is that, for example, OpenAI will do an announcement of its latest, O3 reasoning models or whatever it is these days. Uh, and it's like really good at these complex maths problems. But that's great. And that's a really sort of, for OpenAI, who's kind of on charting a course towards AGI, that's a great bit of progress. But for Joe Bloggs in Business X, what does that mean to me? So I wonder whether part of it is because it's just not being translated from that sort of like model advancement level down into, well, what does it matter for me and how can I sort of use it? Does that make sense? Or do you think there's something
Yeah.
else going on?
No, there's a big gap in it. How do you use it? How do you use these tools? How do you make these tools practical for yourself? And that gap is really big, right? Some people use it for very simple things, and some people use it for much more sophisticated things, right? It's a big variance, right? Some people call it the digital adoption gap. I think
Mm.
we have an AI adoption gap that is massive in the world, and it's gonna get bigger as innovations keep getting released exponentially. But we as humans and enterprises, which are composed of humans, takes very, very long to adopt these things.
Very interesting. I think that's probably a whole podcast discussion just around that, to be perfectly honest, which is kind of like, people accept change slowly. They don't like to be disrupted and stuff like that. Although a lot of disruption happens, individuals don't really like, we're creatures of habit, so we don't really like change that greatly. And, I think imagination is the biggest limitation in many cases because these, I mean, it is probably feasible now. I mean, you hear a lot about Y Combinator who will say stuff like, there's going to be a unicorn company created of just a single employee and who just has AI agents that do all sorts. And it's feasible, technically speaking, to have sales enablement agents and marketing agents and content creation and all the kind of like automation of lead nurturing and sales processes and customer support. Like it's kind of all there, but it's not really been fully embraced. It's still the humans largely relied upon to do everything. And it's almost like these tools are just this little extension of our brain that we're sort of dipping into from time to time, rather than reimagining what we're doing in the first place,
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. I think that's correct. I think overall is going to make us all a little bit more productive every quarter, every year, and that's very good. And some of those leaps in productivity are small, and some of those leaps of productivity are big, and it varies depending on individuals, use cases, etc. But I think it's exciting, right? I think it's pretty cool to we have unlocked this massive toolbox that we can now use as humanity. And you're right, like the creativity is one limitation, cost is another one. I think, there's as well noise, right? There's not a lot of things that are getting the proper exposure as they should, right? So, there's some tools that I think should deserve a lot more praise than they actually are having. And the other way around, right? There's some tools that everybody talk about, but it's like, yeah, it's cool. I don't use it every day, right? It's typically reasoning models, right? Like
Mm.
those advanced reasoning models. They are very impressive when you need them, but do you need them really 10 times per day? Not really. No, you maybe use it only a few times a week, right? If so. Um, and so, like we make a huge amount of noise of like, yeah, AI is now much better at doing research than human, etc. Yeah, but how many times do you actually need to do research on a daily basis?
Mm.
Maybe if your job is specifically for that, but that's a small, tiny subset of humans. Um, Whereas, typing, we type on it. A lot of people are typing on a keyboard at many, many, many different types of jobs in the world. So why we don't use, speech to text, whisper flows, all these types of tools, much more embedded into what we do every day.
Mm.
That's, small benefits, but 100 times per day and, across millions of people.
Yeah, that's such a good point, and I think I use dictation quite a lot, and I'm probably at a bit of an outlier only because I got into this thing because of voice technology originally, and so it's like spent a lot of time testing all them voice applications and got used to just dictating. So I tend to dictate quite a lot, but the problem is, if you listen to me dictate, you will think that I sound like a madman because it's hi Guillaume, comma, new line, how's it going, question mark, just checking in. It's like I'm verbalizing the grammar, and it's so annoying because it can't be that difficult to take a raw string of text and tell an LLM just format that into an actual message with all the appropriate grammar and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean?
So I'm gonna make them free publicity, but you should try Whisper Flow,
Right.
which is which does exactly this, right? You say what you want to say, and they then um, right away write it for you, right? So they're gonna not only take your voice and make it into a text, but they're gonna rewrite that message so that it has capital where it should be and commas, etc. And I use them all day, every day for emails, for web searches, for Teams messages, for everything.
Right.
And I wonder why Apple has not released that kind of capabilities, and Google as well. I guess they're working on it, right? That would be the only explanation.
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna check that out. Whisperflow. I'm gonna have a look at that. WISPR flow.ai. I'm gonna definitely check that out because if I could assign a shortcut where my microphone shortcut is on all of my keyboards to do that, it would save me so much heartache because I've got
So
to
that's what
rewrite
it
stuff.
does, right? Is
Right,
on Control or FN, you press, you talk, and it writes it down, and it writes it down also with like a ready to go message. So it's pretty cool.
right. That's on my list. Thank you for that. There you are. Nice one. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Guillaume. This has been an absolute pleasure, as always.
Thanks for having
Foundever.com.
me.
No worries, no
Yes.
worries. Foundever.com, yeah, for people who want to check it out. And I'm assuming
Yeah.
they can connect with you on LinkedIn if you've got any jobs going or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah. On LinkedIn is fine. I post semi regularly, and foundever.com for to know about what we do. And we definitely have job openings in the AI team, so people can certainly reach out and apply.
Wicked. Sounds good. Thank you so much. Really, really impressed with the stuff that you're doing there at Foundever, and I'm glad to see that it's AI is being embraced as the opportunity, and who knows where it will go in terms of the potential impact and transformative impact on Foundever as a business. I think that if these tools that you're building get rolled out as the intention is and they start being utilized, I think that 15% AHT impact is going to be doubled and trebled and quadrupled, and it's going to just keep going basically. And so it's great to see that you're leading the charge and being at the forefront of it, because there is a lot of BPOs who are more on the threat side, who really believe that this thing is a threat to them, and they are really unsure about what the impact's going to be on their business. And it's almost like ostriches with their heads in the sand, just waiting for what's going to happen, which is crazy.
Well, glad to see that this is the message that is being conveyed from us. So yeah.
Good, good. Thank you so much again, and thank you all for tuning in. Always a pleasure, and always great to have you. And we'll see you again on the next one. Thanks now. Bye now.